Brittany, can you put the documents from Chris in the executive session folder when you get a chance? I'm going to open them separately here. Looks like there's one in there, but not the contract from his first email.
I'll go ahead and send the contract in there right now.
Oh, you have access? I didn't know you did.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks.
Hey, folks, just so you know, we are live with the graphics.
Ladies and gentlemen, we were supposed to start a meeting at 6:30. We're waiting for one or two more directors to join, so we have quorum. And as soon as one of them shows up, I've been in touch with both of them. They both intend to join us. As soon as one of them shows up, we'll proceed. Thank you for your patience. Director Collins, did you just join us?
I did.
Lovely. All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We now have a quorum, and I know that Director Johnson's going to join us here in a minute. This evening, we do not have Director Selvaraj D'Souza, nor do we have Director Flashman. He's off with a college alumni situation, so I wish him the best. And unfortunately, Director Dodd is ill, so she will not be able to join us. So we have 6 members of the board are present and accounted for. And so we have quorum, and we will proceed to our meeting. This is a special meeting called to deal with some issues that could not wait until the regular scheduled board meeting in May. Mr. Cummins, I understand you have a request of the board.
Yeah, President Farrell, I don't know how many members of the public are watching tonight, but it dawned on me that our normal order of operations is to have executive session at the very beginning of the agenda. And we usually play videos for anyone that is in the public and watching. We don't actually have any videos for tonight. So a suggestion for the board to consider is just changing the order of operations and doing the regular business first. But again, I don't know if anybody's out there watching tonight or not.
All right, thank you for that. we need a motion to adopt the agenda, and I'm happy to entertain a motion that includes the amendment that is suggested by our CEO.
I move to amend the agenda to move item E, executive session, to item H, the second to the last item,
And to adopt the agenda
and
as
to adopt
amended.
the amended agenda.
Okay, I'll second that.
Second by Director Juszczyk. Is there any further discussion on this question? Hearing and seeing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. The next order of business is the approval of the minutes of April 12th, 2023. Can I have a motion?
So moved.
So a motion by Director Collins. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Seconded by Director Johnson. I'm going to get this. I'm going to get it. Any questions or any debate on the question of adopting the minutes? Hearing and seeing none. All those in favor say aye.
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 You voted unanimously. All right. The next order of business is member comments. Brittany, do we have anybody signed up?
We did not have anybody signed up for member comments.
And has anybody raised a hand?
I do not see any hands raised.
All right, then we'll move on. The next order of business is the appointment of a legal committee vice chair. This is an action that has to be taken by the board. I've asked Director Collins if he would be happy to, well, not happy, if he would be willing to serve as vice chair. I'm going to be in Minnesota Minneapolis next week. Normally the president chairs the legal committee meeting, but I don't know how good my access to the internet will be. And so I wouldn't want the legal committee not to be able to proceed forward. So can I have a motion about appointing the vice chair of the legal committee?
Motion to appoint Mike Collins as vice chair of the legal committee.
Motion by Director Juszczyk, seconded by Director Petrine. Any discussion?
Yeah, just one quick discussion item. John, that's what was the date that you're not going to be available?
Next week, the 3rd.
It's Wednesday, the 3rd.
I believe that's when our legal committee meeting is. Somebody
Okay,
correct me.
That sounds right to me.
Okay.
Okay.
I may be able to
fine.
make, I may be able
That's
to
fine.
make it, Director Collins, but I don't want, if I have bad internet, I don't want the committee meeting
Yep.
to be adjourned to
Nope.
lack of quorum.
Happy to serve. Just wanted to make sure I didn't have another commitment, and I do not.
Wonderful. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 That's unanimous. All right, next item of business is the zoning modification amendment. And the CEO and I will address that. Do you want to go first there?
Yeah,
Mr.
I
James?
think I just want to make a few introductory comments and talk about why I see this as a fairly significant thing that you all want to think about weighing in on. So everybody knows from time to time, we need to approach Fairfax County relative to obtaining certain approvals or permits or different types of things for mostly capital facilities, but in general, I'll just say site improvements of the many facilities we own throughout Reston. And a couple of years ago, the county adopted a new zoning ordinance, and we call it ZMOD for short. Many of you know the Virginia Supreme Court overturned that largely because it had to do with how they were adopting things, and I wasn't here for that, but using Zoom and so forth. So the county's going through a readoption process. You all may recall that you took a motion, albeit brief, to look for opportunities to weigh in on that as it's moving its way back through the system. So without getting into a lengthy discussion, what we've tried to do is bring something back to you tonight that will allow RA to think about how it can put itself in the best business posture relative to those permits. And the nuts and bolts of it from a staff standpoint work like this. There, within the master zoning, and the master zoning is basically a master planning district, we'll call it the PRC. There are procedures for basically rezonings, and there are exceptions for when you have to go through that process. Now, the reason that's a big deal from a business standpoint is that's a fairly expensive and time-intensive process for the staff to do things on your behalf. So when the county lists off certain exceptions, meaning we could simply go into a ministerial process to get a site plan approval or a grading approval or something as compared to a rezoning process, that saves us time and money. So what we've tried to do is outline a series of exceptions for your consideration. And there are a variety of topical areas. Some of these are literal site improvements, bollards, lighting standards, batting cages, certain kinds of pergolas, that sort of thing. But maybe probably equally as important, I'm going to put on your radar screen, is expansion of use, quote unquote, and the sizing requirements around that. It would seem a little bit onerous to me, having administered planning for a number of years, to have to rezone all of Reston to add a tennis court somewhere, for example. I don't believe that to be the intent of the PRC zoning. So what you see in front of you tonight is some red lines that we're suggesting. And then, of course, there are a multitude of ways we can approach the county. In the past, the board has authorized the board president or the CEO to go make testimony and to deliver something that looks like this to them. I would just be looking for whatever action you end up taking, some amount of clarity. I would like to be able to speak to the philosophical business impact. And I think when you have a county the size of Fairfax County, sometimes that can get lost in the shuffle of a zoning ordinance that is enormously long, but this one section has significant financial impacts to us. So I'll stop there. And I know Board President Farrell has some thoughts, having been involved in this and some other communication as well.
Thank you, Mac. So the returning members of the board will remember that we went through a bit of a problem when we tried to add lights to Barton Hills, that the zoning administrator ruled that we needed to get a PRC amendment, which effectively is a rezoning. And the cost of going through a rezoning can go from $250,000 to $1 million because of all the reports and studies that have to be done as part of a PRC amendment. And so when the necessity to readopt the ZMOD came forward because of the Supreme Court case, this is an opportunity, and I took the opportunity to discuss the situation with our planning commissioner, John Carter, and pointed out to him the really great impact on RA operations to have a description of what is an accessory use be so narrow that it was limited to gazebos and benches. Mr. Butler, to his great credit and effort, tried to get the zoning administrator to give us some bright lines as to what would require a rezoning and what would not require a rezoning. And unfortunately, the zoning administrator was not able to provide us any comfort along those lines to give us any sense of what would and would not require a $500,000 in processing costs over and above the cost of actual construction. And those kind of expenses get so large that in some cases you wouldn't even undertake $100,000 improvement because the cost of processing would be so great. So Mr. Butler prepared this proposed amendment, and I have discussed the matter with our planning commissioner in the hypothetical, and whether or not he would be open to proposing this amendment if we, as an association, presented it to the planning commission next week when they take up the readoption of the ZMOD. He advised that they are being instructed by staff not to consider any amendments in the readoption of ZMOD, but I got to believe that amendments are going to be made. And but he also said to me that if in fact there are no amendments allowed or considered in the readoption of ZMAD, that he would have an amendment such as the one you see tonight incorporated as what they call a follow-on motion. And what that does is get this correction to an overreach or overinterpretation, restrictive interpretation of accessories onto the staff work schedule, so that the staff would work up an amendment starting with what we have drafted and come back to the board sometime in the near future with a little bit more clarity as to when we do and when we don't have to go through a $500,000 expense. And so the hope is that we would present this amendment to the Planning Commission next week when they consider readoption of ZMOD, and that it would get, at the very least, put on, if not incorporated into the ZMOD, it would at the very least get put onto a follow-on motion that would then result in it getting on the work schedule for the staff to consider and work it through with the association to reduce the paperwork, the red tape, the cost for us to actually go through the process. So I think the appropriate thing here is a motion to direct the staff to present the draft amendment to the Planning Commission. And I hope someone will make that motion.
I move that we, that the staff present the amendment as written to the Planning Commission.
Can I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Collins and Director Petrine. Further discussion?
Just one question. I think the staff may have noted this in some of their feedback for us to consider, but what is the risk potentially of bringing some of these items up to the Planning Commission, kind of bringing more attention to certain items that may not have required a plan in the past? But if we do bring them up now and ask for the exception, could we then potentially be burned by not being granted the exception and solidifying the fact that everything that we just brought forward now requires a plan?
So if I can answer addressing that question, I think it's the opposite problem right now. The problem right now is we don't know. And every application becomes an ad hoc decision, and we have nothing to guide us. And you spend a whole lot of money putting together a proposal, and without knowing, do I have to go through the rezoning or can I do it by special exception? So there is a risk that something that might have been allowed to proceed without planning rezoning might wind up getting there. But right now, it's a complete mystery. We have no idea. And the answer that we get from the zoning administrator is, well, we'll tell you after you propose something. And there's going to be give and take on this amendment, Director Growich. And so I don't expect that this amendment is going to get adopted exactly as it's being proposed. And that in a larger way kind of helps us get to the point where you're talking about, where we don't have, or we do have some guidance on how to proceed with the capital program that we have in front of us.
Appreciate the further explanation. Thank you.
Director Justek had her hand up, and then Director Petrine.
I'm wondering on number 4, if we think about it from the perspective outside of RA and think about it in the perspective of, say, our residential members, if the additions to their existing residential use, when an addition does not exceed 7,000 square feet. So an addition of a residential use, I would guess, is like a shed. And are we concerned about those types of things not having to go through the normal process? Or
I'm sorry.
Or because I know within our DRE resolutions, we have a change of use. resolution that says if our members are changing use to their property, that they have to go through DRB. So I just want to make sure, are we in conflict with that DRB resolution or not in this case based on the language in number 4?
Yeah, this would have no impact on DRB. Mr. Petrine,
Right.
Mr. Butler, did you want to answer that question? Mr.
Did I
Butler?
want to answer the question?
No, Mr. Butler had his hand up. I
Oh,
thought he was
okay.
going to answer
Well,
a question.
yeah, if Bob wants to go first. I just have a comment on Jennifer's comment.
Go ahead.
Okay.
I'll-
Yeah, Jennifer, that's actually a really good comment. The point we were trying to do with that red line and adding that particular bullet is that in the existing ordinance, it combines buildings and uses together. And we wanted to split the two because we think, and maybe the key word here is to add recreational uses.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too.
Because I'll give you the example. So Chris and I worked on some numbers and some metrics. So as an example, if we wanted to add a pickleball court, so basically a tennis court size thing, right, with 4 pickleball courts, that's about 6,000 square feet, give or take. And, so from a recreational use, you're not really changing the use, you're just adding this particular facility, but it's greater than the 10% and greater than the 2,000 feet. So we thought it appropriate to split buildings and uses. And so, and for our purposes, maybe if we add the, recreation or recreational to that, it might add some more clarity and might be a little more well accepted.
Yeah, I would be in favor of that because that's along the lines I was thinking that you guys would probably going down is because we care, within RA about recreational items, but I don't want to conflict or make members confused. Like I don't have to go to the county, but I do have to go to DRB, and that happens all the time, right? With our members is who do I have to go to get approval and how many different groups? So I would be in favor of adding that. Under the minor accessory structures, I'm sure that we probably can't add an exhaustive list, but I'm not seeing splash pads in there, and that's something that we certainly have added or talked about. We might consider adding that piece.
Okay.
So before I go to Director Petrine, and I see Travis has got his hand up. Do you want to go ahead and make a motion to amend the main motion to do those two things, Director Juszczyk, just so we're clear?
Yes, I can make a motion. I thought I might collect some notes in case there are others as we go through and then do
Well, we
an
can
amended.
always
We
add
can always
further amendments.
keep amending.
Right.
Okay. I'll make a motion to amend Travis's motion, or the main motion, to add to number 4 the word recreational before the word uses, and to add to the list in number 6 a splash pad.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Trevor, seconds. Is there any debate on that amendment?
I just had a question about that. What is a splash pad?
It's not a pool. It's like one of those water facilities where like the jets shoot up and kids like to run through them.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay. Well,
Good description.
Any other questions on the amendment?
I have a question on item 6.
Well,
it's more.
okay. We're going to take up the Just Suck amendment first, and then I'll come back to you. Is that all right, Director?
Sure.
Okay. All those in favor of the amendment as stated by Director Just Suck, say aye.
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 Chair votes aye. Unanimous. Director Petrine.
Okay. On item 6, I hate to be picayune, but the decision that was made by the county in the case of Barton Hill was based on the fact that in item minor accessory structures did not include lighting. And my fear is that we have a very strong opportunity of missing something that, like pickleball, that it will be another 40 years before they amend the zoning ordinance. And we may be stuck with our list of accessory structures and not anticipate something that, you know, will become very popular in the near term. And that's the problem, that we're kind of giving the county an out because they used the rules in their favor when they acted upon what had been a very I think a reasonable application before, and denied us, and we had to go through an appeal which we lost. So I'm just concerned that if we could define it more generally instead of very specifically. The trouble with that is that they can interpret that too. So
That's the challenge. If you have a specific amendment you'd like to make, Director Petrine, I'm happy to have that motion made. I see our Mr. Cummins has his hand up, then Director Josek.
Yeah, I think, Bob, you're hitting on the key point, you know, in this conversation. And just as a reference point, because I did zoning administrator work for quite a while, my strong preference when I did this work was to have language that looks like the existing language that simply allows for interpretation, and then to be very consistent in how that was applied. So it was applying the same standard, you know, across the board. In this situation, whether or not you wanted to view lighting as a change in use or an accessory structure or something that was not contemplated, it certainly was impactful. There's no question. This board contemplated whether it was going to impact the neighborhood and whether we wanted to put it in or not. I think the challenge we're wrestling with right now is, should anybody have to come up with a universe of minor accessory structures, which is not an exercise that is typically done and put into zoning. And I think what we're really doing is starting a process by which we want to talk to the county about being specific about which things will impact us from a business standpoint, whether it ends up in the zoning ordinance or we gain better clarity that non-impactful things, meaning non-lighting or stuff like this, is we don't need to worry about triggering the PRC. I think there are actually multiple solutions, but the ZMOD is right in front of us. So that's really why you're looking at it tonight.
Mr. Petrine.
If we came up with an exhaustive list and it proved, and the county was willing to sit down and discuss an alternative approach, that would be wonderful. My fear is that they'll just, the greater this list, the longer this list becomes, the greater the likelihood is they'll dismiss the entire list and just go back to their, you know, benches, gazebos, playground equipment, and bus shelters. All those very, very important, but unlikely additions that we would make.
Anyone else? Director Josek.
So I might have a slight solution to that, but I think what we're trying to do at the most is get the Board of Supervisors and the Planning Commission and the staff to understand that we need that clarity. So going to them with at least, hey, these are the things that we think are accessory structures might give us some information. If we add to the end of number 6, something like, or other similar structures as determined by the zoning administrator, does that get us to a place where we're not limited to just this list that we're proposing, but we're suggesting that there is some, play that the zoning administrator has? Because I feel like in the ruling that came down about the lighting up Barton Hill, it was basically like, well, it wasn't in the list, so we're not going to, we're not going to approve it. But there wasn't any other clarification to us besides that.
Nor was one offered.
Right.
If you wanted to everything that's in the zoning ordinance is subject to the zoning administrator's interpretation. So if you wanted to achieve that, I might, as a practitioner, recommend or simply stopping at or other similar structure. And
Okay.
if you wanted to make that motion as an amendment, I'm sure you'll get a second.
So I motion to amend number 6 to add the words or other similar structures to the end.
Is there a second? Second from Director Petrine. Any debate? Hearing and seeing none, I'll call the question on the amendment only. Director Juszczyk?
I thought you were about to say vote.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It's unanimous. All right. Are there any other items of concern with regard to the main motion? Are we ready for a vote? It looks like it. All those in favor of the main motion to direct staff to bring this to the Planning Commission on May 3rd, at the Planning Commission hearing on May 3rd, say aye.
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 All right, it's unanimous. We move on. Thank you for that. Mac, I think you've got clear instructions. Great.
I have one other thing under this topic.
Go
Sorry.
ahead, Director Juszczyk.
We, as not this board, but a previous board, voted to have staff prepare testimony for the hearings on ZMOD. And I wanted to ask staff if we think that testimony and those decisions that the prior board made are still applicable, and is it worth incorporating our old testimony with this new item and giving it fully again?
Mr. Butler, can we have an answer?
I would have to go back and look specifically at that and to see what, I know a lot of that testimony was quite extensive as well, as you may recall. A lot of it having to do with accessory units and so forth. So I would prefer to go back and pull that testimony and see what still might have value in presenting. And then that's something I can send out to the whole board in quick fashion this week in advance of the hearing next week.
Then I'd like the board to, because I remember the testimony, and I still think that it is applicable. I'm not sure they'll do anything with it based on how they're moving forward with ZMOD. But I'd like the board, after we get Larry's thoughts and a copy of it, to consider a unanimous consent motion to let staff move forward with the testimony if we agree that it's still useful.
Director Petrine?
Are we aware of any changes that have been made to ZMOD since it was overturned by the Supreme Court?
The Planning Commissioner Carter told me that they were trying to just jam through a readoption of the ordinance as was adopted, 18 months ago, and that there would be no amendments considered. Now, that was the staff, which struck me as a little bit odd, since the staff doesn't have the ability to dictate to the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission tends to dispose of things as they see fit. So I don't know. As of right now, what's advertised is what was adopted.
So the 2-acre limit for ADUs is still in place. Okay, thank you. My concern is that there was some discussion at one point about lowering it to an acre.
Mr. Butler, you had your hand up.
Yeah, just so as far as testimony, typically the testimony that's provided is approved by the board. It may be a challenge just timing wise for unanimous consent on that. So I'm not sure, maybe this is a question for Tony. If kind of going to what you were saying, Jennifer, we'll take our best crack. I made
Is
a
there
note
another
here.
path?
Yeah, to redline, the prior testimony, at least to make notes of what I think, in my opinion, should be retestified. But without a board meeting and, hope for unanimous consent, there's got to be a way to green light this in some way, shape, or form.
So if I could add, and Mr. Champ, please jump in here if I get misled. You had a board vote authorizing the prior testimony, and it strikes me that vote has not been repealed or rescinded, so that you're in a position to take that prior testimony and resubmit it without worrying too much about changes or getting unanimous consent. It's still the board position from whenever that was adopted.
So long as you don't substantially deviate from what was previously adopted, Larry, I think you're okay to go.
Yeah.
But if you're making massive changes, then yeah, you'd need to do a unanimous consent motion or something like that.
Yeah, I think if anything, it would just be, it might be reduced in length depending on, the review I do. But I don't think there's no intent changes or anything like that, or substantive changes. I think it was just, there may be some things we don't need to testify on.
I think you should be okay. Again, as long as you're carrying out the substantive intent of the board and the directions you were given in that motion.
Okay.
And the prior motion we just did would cover the addition of some testimony, and what we just approved, or do we have to have a separate motion to add that to the testimony?
We already gave the staff direction to adopt, to present the text amendment that we have approved. So we're good there.
We're good. Okay, cool. That's all I had. Thanks.
Okay. All right. If we're done with that topic, we'll move on to the Reston Master Plan. I had two things to report. There was a land use committee meeting of the Board of Supervisors this morning that I attended on behalf of the association. The most important things are that the Planning Commission public hearing on the Reston Master Plan is now scheduled for June 14th, and the Board of Supervisors public hearing on the Reston Master Plan is tentatively scheduled for July 11th, but it was clear that there's a strong possibility it would get pushed off until the last meeting before the August recess, which tends to be at the end of July. Let me see, going quickly over some of the notes, and I'll reduce this to writing further. There has been one supervisor, Supervisor Walkinshaw, had a question with what was the meaning of biophilic, and nobody was able to give him an answer. He questioned whether or not that, given the fact that nobody knows what that means, according to him, or if only 5% of the population knows what that means, did that need to be in the Planning Commission, in the master plan? Supervisor Palchik raised a specter of pretty intense multifamily being added to the village centers. And I know one of the objectives of this rewrite was to reduce the potential for multifamily in where our shopping centers are from 50 units to the acre, which is high-rise density, to 20 units to the acre, which is garden apartment density. I think that it might be a good idea, without objection, to invite Supervisor Palchik to come take a tour of our village centers, and unless there's an objection, I'd ask our CEO to invite her to do that so we can show her that we already have housing incorporated into our village centers, and to let her get an understanding of just how small our village centers are. She made reference to the Nutley Street Pan Am Shopping Center, which is an enormous piece of property. And you could easily see converting some of that to housing. But I don't know how she anticipates jamming a high-rise building into any of North Point or Hunters Woods or Shadowwood. There was a conversation about the rental workforce housing requirement in the TSAs in Reston, and there was a comparison of that to the TSAs in Tyson's, which, you know, Reston would be 12%, Tyson's would be 13%. So a lot of conversation with some board members about Reston isn't that different from the rest of the county, which drew guffaws from many of those in attendance. Let's see. And some conversation about the new chapter on health equity and economic development. I had an opportunity to talk to Supervisor Smith from Sully District and Chairman Najelski Eichner about the concerns we have as an association with the Parks and Rec chapter and the changes that we've made to that, or proposed that this board proposed to be made to that chapter. Last Thursday, I think it was, I had an opportunity to sit down with Commissioner Carter and go through the changes that this board adopted back in January. It was the first that he was aware of those changes, and he indicated to me that he would sit down with staff to try and incorporate as many of those changes as possible. One of the things that's really important, and Director Justek has pointed this out, that you could read the comprehensive plan of the current draft is giving the Park Authority the ability to veto changes that the association would make in its recreational facilities. And obviously we don't want to have that around. A lot of the county officials simply do not appreciate the extent of RA's recreational and open space. When I tell them that we have 1,350 acres that RA administers compared to the 20 acres that the Park Authority administers that's available for local use, that really takes them back. When they find out that we have 15 swimming pools and 54 tennis courts, they're even further taken aback. So I think we have some opportunities here to make some inroads into getting the changes we adopted as a board back in January incorporated into the comprehensive plan coming in July and August. I am advised by Commissioner Carter that the transportation changes that the board had adopted back in January have already been made in the latest draft. I will confess that I have not finished reading the latest draft, and a new draft apparently is coming out also, although the changes are mostly grammatical between the last staff draft and the current one. That's everything is going on. There will be further interaction with Commissioner Carter and with other members of the Board of Supervisors and members of the Planning Commission in an attempt to get the changes that we voted on it incorporated into the final document. Happy to answer any questions if there are any. And if somebody has a better idea how to go forward, happy to entertain that also. Director Justek, you have your hands up?
Yeah, that's what I wanted to maybe suggest is, you know, we're at the ending stages now, and there's going to be a lot of back and forth behind the scenes on specific wording changes. The RA board previously had appointed, I think it was me, John, Bob, and Larry to work on line edit changes to the draft, and we were able to do that and bring some of them forward, you know, timely at meetings. But in this last stretch, I wonder if there might be another avenue to go down to maybe allow us to make line edits that keep, within the value statements that the board has adopted, and work with staff, the supervisors, planning commissioner, to get those incorporated in the final stages, and then obviously bring all of them back to the board. But I'm not sure that we have time to go back and forth with line edits and get constant approvals of, we requested this line edit, they requested this, are we okay with that, can we go say yes to it? That back and forth is going to be fast. So I'm wondering if the board would be okay with the previous group, or maybe think we can have one additional board member without having a quorum issue participate in a line edit review and negotiation process. And I could make a motion to that effect, but I'd like to hear if there's any other ideas out there before I do that, or thoughts against it.
Well, I would expect that as that I'd be involved in those kind of negotiations, and so long as we were carrying forward with the intention, just like we said earlier tonight, with the general intention of the board, that we already have that authority. But I don't know if there's anybody else who wants to be involved going forward besides, I welcome your help. I don't know if Director Petrine wants to continue into this exercise. And who was the other one?
It was me, you, Bob, and Larry. And then I think that John Mooney, because he was our rep on the board, we were gonna CC.
Well, the recommendations that for changes that Mr. Mooney wanted that we adopted have already been included.
Yeah.
So I think that the three of us, you, me, and Mr. Petrine, can go forward unless somebody has a different idea. I see.
No
Director Graywood
objection.
shaking his head. If there is no objection, we'll continue on in that mode.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Okay. The next item of business is the executive session, I believe. Can I have a motion to go into executive session, please?
So move.
Executive session for contractual and personnel matters. That's what's on our list, right?
That's your motion, Director Petrine?
That is my motion.
And have a second? Second from Director Juszczyk. Any opposed? All right, take us away, Brittany.
Travis, if you can hear me. Brittany, can you invite Travis into the executive session?
He will need to rejoin the room because it's still open. I'd have to close out the broadcast room in order to rejoin him.
Oh, I can add myself. Thank you.
All righty.
think we're all back from executive session. I need a cleansing motion from someone, please.
I'll
Move
jump
that the
in.
Ruston Association Board of Directors certifies to the best of each member's knowledge that only matters appropriate for executive session of a contractual or personnel nature were discussed or considered by the board during executive session.
Second.
Second by Director Petrine. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Unanimous. I have a motion regarding a contract. Director Petrine.
I move in accordance with the association's policies for purchasing and procurement to approve the contract with Titan Pool Services Incorporated for pool construction services at the Shadowwood Pool in an amount not to exceed $209,900.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Second by Director Johnson. Discussion? Are we ready for a vote? Looks like we're ready for a vote. All those in favor say aye.
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 We have Director Johnson, Director Petrine, Director Collins, Director Graywich. Those opposed? Director Josek opposes. All right, the motion carries. I don't see any further business on our agenda. Am I overlooking anything, council?
Not that I'm aware.
Mr. CEO, is there anything else you needed us to cover tonight? I see
No,
him
sir.
shaking
Good
shaking his head no. All right, there being no further business before the board this evening, we stand adjourned at 8:42. Thank you all for taking the time to take care of these things before and not waiting on them until May. We wish Supervisor Dodd a quick recovery and look forward to seeing her in May. Thank you all for the evening. I appreciate it. Take